Do you hear a rustling in the trees? Have you caught glimpses just out of the corner of your eye of mysterious robed figures in places where you wouldn't expect them? Does the quaint legend of the small town you're visiting feel like it might be just a little too real? If you've answered yes to any of these questions, steel yourself, because you just might be in a folk horror story, and if you are, things are bound to get stranger.
A straight-laced English police officer is sent to a beautiful rural community. Despite the locals' assurances that all is well, he's convinced that there is something dark happening under the veil of an idyllic community. Critical of the locals and their customs, the police officer stumbles into a mystery he could not possibly have fathomed. If you've seen the 1974 film The Wicker Man, this summary might sound familiar to you. But that was a trick. I'm not talking about The Wicker Man. I'm talking about Hot Fuzz. Welcome back to the Horror Diner, where we serve up piping hot horror right to your table. I'm Spooky Pie, your waitress, your chef, and your new friend who's going to sit down and talk about horror with you. If it's your first time at the Horror Diner, you have to fight. Just kidding. Here at the Horror Diner, we're going to talk about all forms of horror media, from books to movies, podcasts, TV shows, video games. If it's horror, it's fair game. But that's not all. We're also going to cook up a little something that goes with the piece of media we're talking about. Not everything features a dish in it or has a clear theme that translates easily to food, so some dishes might end up being more of a stretch than others, but dang it, we're going to make it work. For our third foray into the Horror Diner, we're going to be discussing Edgar Wright's 2007 seemingly buddy cop movie that is so much more. So let's get into it. A bit back, I was driving in the car with my wife and I was yammering on and on about horror. Specifically folk horror, because that's what I do. I constantly bombard her with this nonsense like I'm giving a dissertation on it. And she's very patient about the whole thing, even though there's only one horror lover in this marriage, and it's me. But anyway, she's listening to me prattle on, and she says, "Hey, you know what could totally be considered a folk horror movie? Hot Fuzz." And I was just kind of dumbfounded for a second, because she's absolutely right, and I'm genuinely mad that I didn't think of it first. So credit where credit is due, this episode wouldn't exist without her and her very good smart idea. Okay, look, it is though. Please don't leave, I worked very hard on this. I bought a textbook literally just for this video. Please stay, it's nice here. In her article, Past Anxieties Define the Folk Horror Narrative, Matilda Groves defined folk horror as follows.
Common identifying elements of folk horror narratives are often rural settings, dark magic, the occult, a fear of the old ways, and the unknown. But to reiterate, this is only the setting where the drama of the people, of the folk, takes place. Folk horror is tragedy, where the characters play out a narrative where someone or something within the setting, rural or otherwise, is either out of character with the people, out of place with the people, or out of time with the people. Folk horror is the tragedy of a protagonist being displaced within an environment, and thus encompassing the horror of being other.
I don't know about you, but that sounds an awful lot like the plot of Hot Fuzz to me. Sure, it's got all the trappings of a buddy cop romp and all the traditional Edgar Wright brand of humor, but it's also very dark. And it's not like this is completely out of left field for him. Just 3 years prior, he made the first film of his Cornetto trilogy, Shaun of the Dead, a horror comedy. And it's around this time that he would make the comedic fake trailer Don't for Grindhouse, so he's not a stranger to horror, even if he chose to package this one, at least from a marketing standpoint, as more of a send-up to films like Bad Boys 2 and Point Break, when its roots are more firmly with, let's say, something like Children of the Corn. But speaking of corn, which will in no way feature in today's episode, before we get too into the weeds of Hot Fuzz, let's get you something started in the kitchen. You look hungry.
We actually really lucked out this time, since there is an infamous scene in Hot Fuzz featuring Bolognese. I did come up against the same issue I had in the Possibly in Michigan video, in that I'm a vegetarian and Bolognese is distinctly not that. But I was lucky again because Lasun Robles over at Simple Vegan Blog came up with a recipe for vegan Bolognese. Yay! Let's get cooking! As you can see, Night Manager Salem has again donated his time to supervise our kitchen adventure. First, you'll want to gather your ingredients. 1 pound vegan ground beef, I like Abbott's, but it's up to you. 1/4 teaspoon ground black pepper, 2 tablespoons olive oil, 1/2 teaspoon salt, 1 28-ounce can of whole tomatoes, 2 teaspoons Italian seasoning, 2 tablespoons tomato paste, 4 cloves minced garlic, which hey, guess what? You can buy already minced, and it will tell you the conversions on the side. 1 bay leaf, 1 cup vegetable broth, 1 cup unsweetened non-dairy milk, 1 large carrot, 1 rib of celery, 1 medium onion finely diced. I'm going to let you in on a secret. You can buy frozen pre-diced onions, which is what I did, because I hate cutting onions, and I'm not going to do it if I don't have to. It's fine. Be nice to yourself. And, of course, pasta. I used fettuccine, but you go ahead and use whatever it is going to make you happy. Go nuts. And always get your supervisor's approval before proceeding. Now, peel your carrot and grab your murder weapon. Go ahead and dice the heck out of that. And when you've finished taking out your aggression on the carrot, you can go after the celery. You will also want to finely dice that. Next, heat your olive oil over medium heat in a large pan. Add the onion and let it cook for about 3 to 4 minutes until it's soft. Add in the garlic, the carrot, and the celery. Let these cook for about 5 minutes until they are also soft. Next, increase the temperature to medium-high heat and put in your plant-based ground beef. Be sure to break it up with a wooden spoon or else you'll have weird fake meat chunks and no one wants that. Let it cook until the fake meat looks browned. This can take 2 to 4 minutes. Increase the heat once more to high and add in the vegetable broth. Let it cook until all the liquid has been absorbed. Go ahead and add in everything left that isn't your pasta. Stir everything together, and again, using your wooden spoon, break up the tomatoes. Let the ingredients come to a boil. Reduce the heat, cover it up, and let it simmer at least 30 minutes. While the sauce is doing its thing, bring a large pot of salted water to a boil. Add in your pasta and cook it according to the package directions. Remove the bay leaf from the sauce, drain your pasta, and add it into the sauce. Combine the pasta and the sauce, making sure it's evenly coated. Go ahead and plate it up. It looks so good! While that's cooling down a little, let's head back to my office. Welcome back to my office. I figured out the microphone. So, if you know me, which I hope you're starting to at this point, you know that folk horror is one of my absolute favorite, if not my favorite, subgenres of horror. Like, okay, I do love a good slasher, but some days a girl just wants rabbit masks, which is not to say that there are no slashers that stray into the gray area of folk horror, but that's a video for another day. A while back, comedian John Blair made a comedy sketch that was a commercial for a fake fall festival, detailing local events like a pie contest, secrecy, a local concert, and the coming of the outsider. It's the funniest thing I've ever seen. Please check the full thing out. I'll have it linked in the description.
So get ready for all your favorite outsider activities, like lying to the outsider, abruptly ending conversations with the outsider, looking at the outsider through Venetian blinds and then snapping him shut when he sees you. Funnel cakes!
There's just something about a town steeped in deep and terrible tradition and a poor chump who just wandered on into it, or in some cases was sent there, but is out of their depth, shouldn't be there, and the locals are planning something that you probably don't want to be here for. It's going to be really cute and folksy up until then, though, so I can't blame you for getting sucked in. Who doesn't love a community barely masking a terrible secret behind smiles that seem just a little too wide and eyes that don't seem to blink enough? Not me. I can't get enough of them. Now, I do want to address that I know that Hot Fuzz, like many a fine horror film such as Silence of the Lambs, is propaganda. We at the Horror Diner do not support propaganda, and it's a testament to the writing and acting in this film that I love it as much as I do in spite of that. But lest you doubt where my allegiances lie, I wanted to get that out of the way. So we've established one of the things Hot Fuzz is, but I see I may not have convinced you yet. I say you may be sitting there going, okay, Spooky Pie, but is it folk horror? Yes. Yes, it is. But before I break down why I think that, we'll need to cover the plot, which means it's time to head to Spoiler Town. So if you somehow managed to not see this movie and you do not want to be spoiled, skip to the timestamp below to avoid spoilers. Please keep in mind that in order to analyze the movie, there will still be spoilers in the latter half of the episode. But if you want to not be spoiled for the entire movie, head to that timestamp. For everyone else who's still here, let's get into it. Sergeant Nicholas Angel has just gotten a backhanded promotion, which is actually really an excuse to send him away. He's apparently too good at his job, so he's being shipped off to Sanford. This is because he's making the rest of the police look bad, which isn't hard, but whatever. Also, he's just been dumped by his girlfriend for caring about his job too much, and just being a general bummer to be around. He's been living in the recruit barracks, and life is just not awesome right now. So he's off to the middle of the country, aka absolutely nowhere, with the only thing he loves, his Japanese peace lily. Of course it doesn't go smoothly. The cottage he was promised is not ready, and he has to live at the village inn. The innkeeper is spooky and ominous, and calls him a fascist. It's for her crossword puzzle, but she's still a queen for it. Nicholas heads out to the pub and immediately is a huge wad as he menaces every teenager in town for being in the pub, despite being told by the proprietors that it's better to have them here than on the street for the greater good. He's already making friends! After he's done wasting the pub owner's time by getting rid of their clientele and only ordering cranberry juice himself, he heads out, where he's immediately almost run over by a drunk driver. He hauls the man down to the police station, arresting half the town's youth on his way. The man he has dragged in for being drunk is greeted warmly by the policeman behind the desk and told to go back to his usual cell to sleep it off. The lack of give-a-dams this place has Nicholas Shorts in a twist. But no one cares, nor should they. The morning after, he goes running, greeted by the whole town as he passes them in a not at all creepy, we're always watching you kind of a way. This is when we meet Simon Skinner, who introduces himself to Nicholas as a slasher of prices. Oh, Timothy Dalton, this is truly your best role. He's actually the owner of the local supermarket, but But it's all very foreshadowy, and he has a tendency to say foreboding things through this whole film that precedes something truly awful happening. Nicholas goes into the station only to find the drunk man from the night before is not in his cell. Turns out he's a police officer at the station, and also the inspector's son. This is Danny, and he's the best person here. It's a decent meet-cute as far as these things go. This is also where I'm going to point out how easily I could make my case that Hot Fuzz also follows a traditional romantic comedy formula in regards to Nicholas and Danny's relationship, and go into a point-by-point breakdown about why Nicholas and Danny are in love, which is my want, but I'm going to be strong and not do that in this video. But know that I could, and also that I am right. The inspector tells Nicholas that Sanford is the safest city in the village statistically. We hear about the greater good again. We're also told Nicholas's predecessor had a nervous breakdown. We meet two belligerent men, both named Andy, who immediately hate Nicholas, and the rest of the office, who are a handful of stereotypes, and also a dog, which is what I care about. Upstairs is the head of the neighborhood watch, who spies on everyone in the whole town from his room of security camera monitors. The inspector tells Nicholas they like to let him think he's helping, implying that this spying is the harmless fun of an old man, and not pushy and invasive like it actually is. Midday, the whole department heads to the pub. Nicholas is appalled by this, but his new co-workers don't really like him either, so it's fine. They spend all of lunch making fun of him. But it's also where we learn that everyone in the country has guns, namely farmers and their mums. This is foreshadowing. After lunch, Nicholas and Danny go on patrol, and Nicholas is annoyed by Danny's constant questions because he hates fun and probably puppies too. Later that night, there is a Welcome to Sanford party thrown for Nicholas by the Neighborhood Watch Association, and he's introduced to the prominent players of the community. Like the town's school headmistress, the local horticulture expert/florist, a farmer, the town priest, the local doctor, a wealthy land developer, and of course, we run into Simon Skinner again, who continues to make Nicholas uncomfortable like a champion. The party becomes a traditional weekly meeting of the Neighborhood Watch, where the members lament the presence of anyone in the town who does not fit the town's ideals and image, especially with the Village of the Year competition around the corner. People should really be conforming to the standard way things are done in Sanford. For the greater good. We get a montage of Nicholas boring schoolchildren to death and being a complete ass to the local reporter, who proceeds to print his name as Nicholas Angle, which makes him very, very mad, and it's very, very funny. When he returns to the police station, his locker has been plastered with newspaper clippings of his misspelled last name. It doesn't have any bearing on the plot other than to emphasize what a joke his co-workers think he is. And also, I just thought it was funny. Because I'm that person who gets a text message with a single typo in it from someone and responds with just the misspelled word.
Medicines. Say medicines.
Type medicines.
I guess that's right, at medicines.
Nicholas and Danny are then set out to try and catch the biggest menace currently terrorizing the village, a swan, who, believe it or not, is going to be a menace throughout this whole film. They end up at the local supermarket, and we again have Skinner, who laments the lack of loyalty of town members who would rather go to a large chain store in a neighboring town. Again, taking issue with change. He then makes a creepy remark about how they should all be beheaded that is passed off as a joke. Later that night, Nicholas pulls a couple over for speeding, apparently on their way to the dress rehearsal for the town production of Romeo and Juliet. Despite being a complete tool to them, Nicholas and Danny are sent to watch the production that night. It's god-awful, clearly supposed to look like the Baz Luhrmann production, and ends in a musical number because sure, why not? Skinner's at the after party because this man is literally everywhere in this town. When they aren't decimating Shakespeare plays, Romeo is a solicitor and Juliet works at the local council. They're also very obviously having an affair. Again, with the creepy, ominous nonsense, Skinner makes a remark about how many secrets someone would be able to find out if they bashed her head in. But, he says it in a charming way, though? I don't know what to tell you. We then see Nicholas and Danny leaving the theater, absolutely flirting with each other, while in the background, an ominous hooded figure holding an axe can be seen. The hooded figure proceeds to go to Romeo's dressing room and axe murder both of the actors. The next morning, the boys are called out to a crime scene. The two actors have supposedly been decapitated in a car crash, though this has obviously been staged. Skinner rolls by in his convertible, blaring Dire Straits' Romeo and Juliet and waxing poetic about the tragedy of it all. When Nicholas asks how he could know who the victims were, Skinner waves him off, saying that news travels fast in a small town, and pieces out with the radio still blaring. Nicholas is convinced that it was a murder and not an accident, even if the rest of the department doesn't buy it, largely because a murder investigation will require them to do work. Since Nicholas is raising a stink, he gets sent on busy work to deal with a gibberish-speaking farmer who has been clipping other people's hedges, and also happens to have a whole arsenal in his shed as well as a sea mine. Continuing his tradition of being everyone in Sanford's favorite person, they confiscate all the man's weapons and then pop off to the pub to celebrate a robust day of being a proper tool. Danny and Nicholas have a heart-to-heart over several pints, while Danny gushes over how amazing he thinks Nicholas is. But more importantly, this is when we learn that Danny's father is the reason he is a police officer, which we already guessed, and also that it's ultimately because the inspector wanted to keep Danny close after his wife, Danny's mother, died in a car accident. Skinner is at the pub, because Skinner is everywhere all at once, with a very drunk George Merchant, the wealthy land developer from the neighborhood watch meeting. They're discussing the recent car accident that was definitely not a murder. After George falls over sloppy drunk, Skinner whispers to Nicholas that he'll be in bits tomorrow. Danny and Nicholas drag blackout drunk George back to his house, and as they leave, we see the cloaked figure again. Danny and Nicholas go back to Danny's house to marathon buddy cop movies while George Merchant is being super murdered across town. The murder is staged as an accident where George inadvertently blew himself up while drunkenly cooking. Nicholas only has a small amount of time to be incensed that he's the only one who seems to see that there's a serial killer on the loose before he's shunted off to oversee a church fundraiser fair. He spots the reporter from earlier speaking with the town florist, but is distracted by every other cop on the force being there on their day off, potentially just to make him miserable. But Nicholas does win Danny a giant stuffed monkey at the fair, and that's pretty cute. The reporter approaches Nicholas, saying he needs to speak to him about George Merchant, and to meet him in the churchyard at 3 o'clock. Nicholas is detained by having to run the prize lottery for the fair. Meanwhile, we see the cloaked figure scurrying up the church roof. Nicholas gets to the churchyard too late, but just in time to witness the reporter get smashed to death by a falling piece of church roof in a scene I can really only describe as Final Destination-esque. Like, it's goopy. Nicholas is even more convinced that there is a serial killer, and the whole force is fed up with him. This results in him getting in a big fight with Danny where he is a complete and total dick and Danny leaves. So then Nicholas has to have his research montage all by himself because he's a big mean fart butt. But after a full night of going through research all by himself, he crawls back to Danny with his tail between his legs. Danny forgives him because he's too good for this goddamn place, and Danny is back on the case with him. They start trying to connect what the victims have in common. Nicholas finds out that it's Danny's birthday, and he has nothing for him because he's a boob. So he runs off to the florist to get him a Japanese peace lily. When he arrives at the florist, he learns that she is closing up her shop and moving away. She tells him that George Merchant, the guy who blew up, has been interested in buying the land her shop was on. But it turns out her land is even more valuable because there are plans to rid a new bypass by it, which is what the reporter had been discussing with her at the fair. So she was instead selling her land to someone in the big city for far more money than she had been offered in order for them to build a new shopping center where her flower shop currently is. Nicholas runs out of the shop and back to his cop car, presumably to radio in and yell about how he's figured it all out. But the second he's out of the shop, the hooded figure appears to murder the florist with her own garden shears. Nicholas runs after the hooded figure, but isn't fast enough to catch him. But the killer does sustain an injury in escaping. After a kerfuffle of screaming at and being screamed at by his fellow police officers, Nicholas is convinced he knows who the killer is, and they all head down to confront the most subtle man in town, Simon Skinner. Nicholas accuses Skinner of killing people off to halt development/modernization of the village, linking each victim to being related to facilitating this and how he thinks Skinner murdered each of them. Skinner is cool as a cucumber over the whole thing and laughs off the accusation. Nicholas tries to use the wound the hooded killer had sustained as his evidence, but Skinner is unharmed and has an entire tape of security footage that gives him a pretty solid alibi. Nicholas spends the next day pouting before having the light bulb moment and realizing that there may be more than one killer. The inspector basically calls him hysterical and sends him back to the inn to sleep it off. But as soon as he gets to his room, he is attacked by a large figure in a hood. After getting his butt handed to him for a while, Nicholas sacrifices his peace lily to bludgeon the hooded figure. He recognizes the man as an employee of Skinner, just in time to hear Skinner over a walkie-talkie asking the man if Sergeant Angel has been dealt with and instructing the man to head up to the castle. When Nicholas reaches the castle, he finds all the prominent members of the community he had met before, other than the ones who've been murdered, all in cloaks, chanting in a circle. After they cease chanting, they discuss how, with Nicholas now dead, they can continue eradicating anyone who is a threat to their way of life and the Village of the Year award. Nicholas emerges to confront them, and they in unison tell him how everything they have done has been for the greater good. They reveal that the murders had nothing to do with the land development, and that each person was killed because they were each in some way a stain on the community, and Sanford could not be perfect with them in it. The lawyer and council employee were terrible actors who were putting a stink on the good name of the Sanford Dramatic Society, an important asset to the village's perfection. George Merchant's opulent mansion was an eyesore not in keeping with the village's rustic aesthetic. The reporter was a shoddy writer with terrible spelling who had ruined the reputation of the town paper, and the florist was killed so that she wouldn't bring her horticultural talents to a different town. It is at this point that the inspector emerges. He reveals how much his wife loved Sanford and how deeply she was involved in the community. The night of the Village of the Year award judging, travelers moved into the town, supposedly mucking up the place and making it imperfect. Sanford lost the title and his wife took her life in despair. The inspector has since committed his life to making sure that the town is perfect at all costs, for the greater good. Nicholas runs and the cult of Sanford pursues him. In fleeing, he falls through the ground and into a mass grave where he finds the corpses of every person who has disturbed the perfection of Sanford. From the teenagers he brought in his first night in town, to the street performers, to the sergeant who Nicholas came here to replace. Fleeing the mass grave, he is ultimately caught by the cult and stabbed by Danny, although one very short scene later, we see that this has been a big fake out and Danny drives Nicholas out to the edge of town to let him escape while the cult thinks he's dead. Danny has been oblivious to the cult, which his father has referred to as his special club, and is in denial about it and his father's involvement, as Nicholas relates everything he has uncovered. Not wanting to take down his own father, Danny gives Nicholas the keys to his car and tells him to escape. Nicholas initially leaves, only to come back after buying supplies. He steals a horse and a bunch of the weapons they had confiscated from the old farmer out of the police evidence locker. It should be noted that the officers see him do this and just kind of let him go. Totally not a comment on the competency of law enforcement. He enlists a bunch of teenagers to spray paint the town's security cameras and heads to the village center to have a showdown with basically the whole town. Because as mentioned earlier, everyone in town has a gun, especially farmers and their mums. Danny comes to his aid and they fight off the remaining villagers together. This goes on for a tremendously long amount of time before the police force shows up, because they're great at their jobs. The inspector attempts to get them to go after Nicholas, but he finally manages to convince his co-workers that the town is being run by a cult obsessed with maintaining the perfect town and killing anyone who threatens that. Seeing that the odds are not in his favor, the inspector turns tail. Instead of following him, they decide to go after Skinner and his employees at the supermarket. Another long fight sequence happens there, and there's a dramatic scene involving Bolognese. Skinner has of course used the distraction to flee in a getaway car driven by the inspector, and Danny and Nicholas give chase. Mind you, in the middle of this chaos, you see the judges for the Village of the Year just standing there totally baffled. That has no bearing on the plot, it's just funny. After briefly stopping to grab the swan that's been terrorizing the village and put him in the back of the squad car, they follow Skinner to where his car has crashed into a small model village of Sanford. There's another fight. The last bit of this movie is mostly fights. The model village gets pretty wrecked, which is sad because it was cute. But it ends with Skinner accidentally impaling himself on the model of the church and the inspector running away while Danny shoots a gun into the air while going, "Ah." But the inspector has taken Danny and Nicholas's squad car to try and escape, where he is accosted by the menacing swan, crashes the car, and is ultimately captured. We wrap up the movie with Nicholas choosing to stay in Sanford instead of going back to London, where they are now sad and miss him because he was the only one who could do his job at all. Also, the police station blows up. It's fine though. The movie closes with Nicholas and Danny driving off to fight crime together, or deal with someone knocking over recycling bins like a Sims 2 NPC. So, are you convinced yet? Even if you are, I'm gonna go ahead, because I didn't make this video just to say, Hot Fuzz is a folk horror film because I say so. I put in the time. I do my research. In the world of folk horror academics, the name Adam Scovell often pops up, partially because he wrote a whole textbook about it. In the aforementioned textbook, Folk Horror, Hours Dreadful, and Things Strange, Scovell names 3 films, referring to them as the Unholy Trilogy, that he cites as being largely responsible for modern folk horror as we know it. These films are Witchfinder General, The Blood on Satan's Claw, and The Wicker Man. Keeping that in mind, one of my biggest cases for Hot Fuzz's folk horror is how, in many ways, the plotline mirrors the plot of The Wicker Man, so here we're going to have to touch on spoilers for both those films. Sorry about it. In both films, we see a self-righteous police sergeant travel to a quaint village far from his home. In the case of the Wicker Man sergeant, this self-righteousness comes from an almost all-consuming devotion to the Christian faith. He believes above all in a sense of morality and purity as strictly defined by his faith. It's even mentioned that he has not consummated his relationship with his fiancée as to keep himself pure until marriage. In Hot Fuzz, while Nicholas Angel is vocally agnostic, he does have a strict moral code that he imposes on anyone he comes across. This is conveyed to us immediately as he is introduced to the audience with Goody Two-Shoes by Adam Ant playing, which repeats the phrase, "Don't drink, don't smoke, what do you do?" as Nicholas Angel is rattling off his accomplishments in the opening sequence. This is further cemented by him just ordering a cranberry juice at the pub and just being a general killjoy. In both of the films, the police sergeant is appalled by the backwardness of the locals. In The Wicker Man, this is again largely religious, as Howie is in an absolute twist about the pagan customs of the island of Summerisle. And in Hot Fuzz, Angel's disgust comes from the way in which some societal norms are ignored for the sake of the greater good, as well as just the general laziness of the rest of the police force. In both instances, these men are wholly convinced that they know best and are morally superior, and in both instances, they absolutely cannot stop telling the locals this, like constantly. Both films feature a debonair gentleman who is more or less the head of the town. In The Wicker Man, we have Christopher Lee as Lord Summerisle, and in Hot Fuzz, we have Timothy Dalton as Simon Skinner. In both instances, they go out of their way to appear friendly and welcoming to the main character. And in both instances, these men say foreboding lines that tip the viewer off about bad things to come. with Summerisle repeatedly telling Sergeant Howie, "You wouldn't want to be here for the May Day celebration. You don't want to see the May Day celebration." And Skinner hinting at each murder before it happens with lines like, "I'm sure if we bashed your head in, all sorts of secrets would come tumbling out, and he'll be in bits tomorrow." And of course, in both instances, these men are directly connected to the cult that is at the heart of the village. In both films, the police sergeant is meant to be killed for the greater good of the community. Although in Hot Fuzz, Nicholas Angel escapes this by faking his death with the help of his boyfriend, and in The Wicker Man, Howie is shoved in a big wood man and lit on fire and no one is all that upset. There are also aesthetic similarities in that in both movies we're introduced to the idyllic village with sweeping shots of the landscape and folk music, and both subscribe to a similar aesthetic of England in the late 60s and early 70s, even if only one of the movies came out in that time period. But regardless, the village of Sanford and its occupants are styled in this time period, and the song that plays when we first are introduced to them is The Village Green Preservation Society by the Kinks, a song specifically written to be about preserving nice things from the past, much like the village of Sanford itself. And not to come without receipts, but in a 2007 interview, Edgar Wright cited the influence of The Wicker Man. What's interesting about Woodward's character is that he's the villain in the film. What we loved about the original Wicker Man, and this is true to some extent in Hot Fuzz, is that the cult, they're kind of in the right. Within their religion, they are entirely justified as far as they're concerned. They aren't portrayed as particularly evil. Even though it's the quintessential creepy village film, from their point of view, they're right, and Edward Woodward is wrong, and he dies for that. I love that about the original Wicker Man. It would also be wrong of me not to note here that Tom Weaver, the head of the Neighborhood Watch Association in Hot Fuzz, is played by Edward Woodward, who, in fact, played Sergeant Howie in The Wicker Man. So it's not like Edgar Wright wasn't aware of what he was doing here. Beyond comparison to the folk horror juggernaut that is The Wicker Man, we can also look at how Hot Fuzz matches up to the ways in which Adam Scovell sought to define the genre. Folk horror regularly builds its sense of the horrific around societies and groups of people that have very specific ways of life, and it is not by sheer chance that these often happen in rural rather than urban. Folk horror uses the otherness that can be attributed to rural life to warp the very reality of its narrative worlds, and often for its own explicit means. And a general rurality can be seen in such narrative tropes as the insider/outsider, the modern city dweller entering the zone of the countryside and being shocked by its differing ways of life. Where places are subject to a cultural form of violence, these are all potentially derived from the sideways tipping of reality through an emphasis on the rural. Hot Fuzz lives firmly in this area of insider versus outsider and rurality versus modernity, a staple of folk horror, and while Hot Fuzz does not venture into anything supernatural as much as folk horror usually does, it should be noted that neither does The Wicker Man. There's a cult, and there are the cult's violent practices, but in neither film do we see anything paranormal occur, so Hot Fuzz is no less folk horror for being grounded in reality. More or less. And to another point, while it's got all the trappings of a buddy cop comedy, Hot Fuzz knows its roots are in horror and acknowledges them. There are horror film references peppered throughout the entirety of the film. When Nicholas first arrives at the inn to check in, the innkeeper, Joyce, says to him, "But you've always been here," which is a direct reference to The Shining. Additionally, Joyce herself is played by Billy Whitelaw, who famously played Mrs. Baylock, Damien's Satanist nanny in The Omen. And while on the subject of The Omen, the death of the reporter is a direct reference to The Omen, where Father Brennan is killed when part of the church falls and impales him. Similarly, the florist's death is a reference to the slasher film The Burning, where the killer's weapon of choice is garden shears. I've also seen people speculate that Skinner's impalement on the church in the model village is a reference to Cannibal Holocaust, but even in my quest to convince you that Hot Fuzz is horror, I'm finding that one a bit of a stretch. That being said, our food should be cool enough to eat by now, so let's go grab a plate and I'll meet you back out in the diner.
Don't worry, it's just bolognese. Pretty good bolognese, too. What do you think? Do you want to try making this? Do you have a favorite folk horror movie or book? Drop your thoughts on the film, the food, and what your favorite piece of folk horror media is in the comments below. Recipe recommendations and citations are all listed in the description. And hey, if you liked your stay here, maybe you think about liking and subscribing to see what we cook up next. And if you want to go even further, we've got a Patreon now! A lot goes on in front of and behind the camera to make these videos, and every little bit helps us keep the lights on in the diner and the gas on in the stoves. Patrons get fun perks like getting episodes early, access to the Horror Diner Discord, and possibly even exclusive cat pictures. And patrons $5 and more get to be part of the Horror Diner Book Club, where every month you vote on a book for me to cover, you can read along with me, and then I make an exclusive video on that just for you on Patreon. You can find that link in the description as well as links to where you can find us at on Instagram, Bluesky, and TikTok. This has been Hot Fuzz, I've been Spooky Pie, and you have been amazing. Y'all come back now, you hear?
Okay. It is 800 degrees in here. Salem! Come hang out, I'm recording! Come hang out with me, Salem. Lukey can hop up too. Hi, Lukey. Hi. Yeah. Wanna hang out? You can hang out. Okay, cool. We have a background loop. I guess that makes sense. The fuck am I talking about though? Also, I'd like you to know that Salem's here. He just doesn't feel like participating. So hot in here. It's so hot in here. This is such a fucking hard sentence to say. Why did I do this to myself? I hate summer. I hate summer. It was going so well. You're so cute. Why won't you be in frame? So hot in here. The textbook just fell off my lap. There goes my fork. And fix my bangs and think about how warm it is and how much I hate summer.
I just look over and make sure it was actually recording because I would be so upset if it wasn't.
I'm sure that was good enough, right?
I don't want to wear false eyelashes anymore.